Is Far Cry 5 worth it in 2022? I've recently went on a little bit of a Far Cry binge, playing through Far Cry 3 and 4, and in October Far Cry 6, but I originally made my first Far Cry 5 review over a year ago when I was at 80 subscribers. So I decided to replay it, and well, my thoughts have changed quite significantly. Thank you all for the support over the last year and a half, guys. Like I said, 80 subscribers when I first made a review on Far Cry 5, mad, really appreciate it. I'm not going to waste any more time for the new viewers, but I really appreciate you guys. You know I do. I love you. We'll be talking about the story and gameplay with minimum spoilers, so let's hop into this and I hope you enjoy. I was originally very critical of the story of Far Cry 5. I wasn't aware of how rooted it was in American culture, or more specifically the nutty cults that exist within that culture. And sure, Far Cry 5 does just do the whole religious nutjob cliche, but I genuinely really enjoyed myself this time around, but it's not great. It's definitely not perfect at all. The structure of this story is really harmed by the gameplay design of the entire game. It's really broken up far too often, and when you get to those big main missions it feels really rushed, which sucks because Ubisoft had something here. Not specifically unique, but this story had a lot of potential. The main villain Joseph Seed is actually really damn good. I didn't speak much on the performance in my original review, but yeah, the guy playing him smashed it here. I believed people could be charmed into becoming nutjobs by this guy. His speeches are great and are actually interesting. This is a good time to mention that I'm not much of a believer in any kind of god, but with characters like this I do kind of get it, especially when we start to get deeper into why he's this religious madman. In a lot of ways, this guy isn't even religious, he's just desperate to cling on to hope since he's convinced himself of this doomsday event. And I really liked what they did this time around. I really didn't expect to walk away with my opinion so wildly different, but like I said, it's not great. As good as Joseph is, the other characters are nowhere near as interesting. Faith Seed is the only one I found even remotely interesting outside of Joseph, and that was only because of the specific ability she has with hallucinations, so it wasn't even her character, it was just her gimmick that I enjoyed. The other two, I think his name is John, and the other guy, I can't remember his name, I'm just not that interesting. I mean, I can't remember their names most of the time. They're just rip-offs of Joseph to me, and I know some of you out there really like them, and that's fine, but they just didn't do anything for me. They just kind of felt like time wasters. I also mentioned the structure is all over the place just a minute ago, not because the story is told in a way that isn't chronological, but because so much time is wasted in between the really interesting missions. You go from hallucinating for 10 minutes and some awesome odd missions, which is where all the Far Cry games are at their best, to collecting animal skins for a guy you don't even know and being forced to do the open world activities for 2 hours. But I'll get to that in the gameplay section, but the point is, the main missions, when they happen, like the proper main missions, are actually really good and the narrative events really work. But there's just so much downtime in the open world that it just loses any sort of stakes or pacing. There are some seriously cool visual moments throughout the story as well. Sure, these little visual moments really make no sense in this story that's supposed to be grounded, even though there's hallucinations, but there's grounded reasons for that. But they're pretty creative ways of telling the story through these visions with Joseph, and are just really fun to watch. And it's all in service to sell this Joseph character to you, and I have to admit, I really like this character. Not because I agree with him, let's get that clear, but because he's actually written pretty damn well for a religious madman. He's right up there with Vass and Pagan for me now. I'm just shocked how much I disliked him and just the game overall on my first playthrough last year. It's very easy to mess up these religious cultist type characters with writing, but I think they did a very good job balancing the grounded take with it, while also kind of going overboard with it like most of these cults tend to do, because obviously they're cults, you know, they're not exactly the most sane people. The actual plot itself though is very weak. You crash in a helicopter and now you've got to save your mates in a pretty boring open world. I'm not kidding, that's the plot. This is a very character-focused story, but only one that's really interesting enough to carry it is Joseph. Luckily, you see him way more often than you would with Vass and Pagan, but for plot, this game just sucks. It's simple, but boring, and for me, that's just simply a bad plot. Like I said, this is about Joseph, the rest is just filler. Your character is also mute, which makes conversations a slog and really pulls you out in terms of immersion when a character has a massive emotional moment only for your character to not respond, and because there's silence in between these emotional moments, you let out a nasty fart as the character starts crying and you just can't help but laugh. Yes, that happened to me. I let out a bad fart when there was a character crying, and I just, it kind of just killed the whole moment for me. Overall, the plot for Far Cry 5 sucks, but I absolutely love what they did with Joseph and the clear inspiration from actual American culture and these cults that actually exist out there, which is genuinely terrifying, because, like you see in the game, if you give nutjobs something to believe in and you can control them, you can make them do anything. Joseph Seed is the standout, but I just can't recommend you play Far Cry 5 for this alone. So let's get into the gameplay and see if Far Cry 5 is actually worth it for you in 2022. Far Cry 5 is definitely just more Far Cry 3, but with some minor changes to the gameplay loop, and these changes are pretty important because some are good and some are downright awful. Far Cry 5 forces you to take part in the open world activities to progress the story. In fact, the whole story relies on you to do these activities, so if you are just a story player, this is not for you. I completely forgot how much time is required to push the story forward, and it really negatively impacts both the gameplay and story with this decision. Firstly, I feel forced to do side activities that I simply don't enjoy. Taking out bases is fun when provided the choice to do them, but when I'm forced to do them, it just feels tedious. Along with these bases, you have to take out various random events that happen in the open world that vary from rescuing hostages or blowing up vehicles and statues and more stuff like that. It's basically just cause in a lot of ways. That's the majority of what you will be doing throughout the entire game. Within the first hour, you will have experienced the entire gameplay loop, and nothing really changes over the course of the game. That being said, the side missions are actually really improved from Far Cry 3 and 4. Most of them are actually quite interesting. Some vary from making you watch animals shag or help a director shoot Far Cry Blood Dragon 3. It is really cool. But once again, I am forced to do most of these missions. Ubisoft. When you force players to do missions, they are not side missions. Those are main missions. They're not side missions. You can't have it both ways. So because I'm forced to do them, it just gets tedious. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the world section. Gunplay is really good. It's the best Far Cry has had, in my opinion. Your guns aren't hit scans, so you have to aim ahead when an enemy is running, when you're using an assault rifle, all that good stuff, SMGs, stuff like that. There is a variety of weapons, from Vietnam-based weapons to over-the-top decked-out snipers and assault rifles, along with space weapons if you have the DLC. All of these weapons are pretty fun to shoot and sound pretty damn good too. Not quite Modern Warfare levels of sound, but it's serviceable. There are more vehicles than ever, varying from helicopters with missiles and miniguns to planes strapped with more guns and your basic ground vehicles like dirt bikes and all that Far Cry stuff. It's fine. It doesn't feel amazing to drive or fly them, but they are serviceable, and you'll be spending most of your time in helis because this world, it's just overly large and dead, but we'll get to that. The skill tree is really weird this time around. You get perk points through challenges rather than experience points, and all of those perks are useless. This was a massive step down from the skill trees of previous Far Cry games. Sure, I get that skill trees get repetitive, but at least just permanently get rid of all the skills or improve on it rather than just half-arsing it. Main missions are really fun, offering some chaotic action with some quieter, somber moments full with narrative goodies. Going from a bunker holding missiles to jumping into a plane to take your enemy out, it's just exhilarating. It reminded me of Saints Row 3's final mission. Just all-out action fun, only it was done better in Saints Row 3. I really like Saints Row 3. I know that isn't a particularly popular opinion, but Saints Row 3, it was just a fun game, man. AI is dog shit. I don't need to talk about this. It's a Ubisoft game in the late 2010s, the AI is terrible, and to counter this, Ubisoft decided to make enemies have pinpoint accuracy to wipe you out with like 5 shots. It's cheap and crap, stay in cover. Ubisoft really needs to figure out their AI problem, because this just cannot last in the PS5 and Series X generation. I'm pretty sure even casual gamers are getting sick and tired of it by now. The AI sucks. So the gameplay isn't the best in the series, but it's not the worst for me. It all depends on how you find the open world and the activities within that world, so let's get into it. The open world for me is the worst in the series, at least the ones I've played. Montana is just not very fun to explore. It's not varied with environments, everything looks the same, and there's just no variety in any sense. The most you've got is rivers. That's about it. You've got trees and rivers, and it's such an odd choice for a Far Cry game to have it set in this very basic open world, which just makes me think Far Cry 5 was just so focused on its story that it could have just been a linear spin-off, but nope, we've got to have a giant open world with nothing creative to do. You can't interact with any of it apart from the AI that roam the world. You spend 10 hours taking out bases, doing side missions and blowing some vehicles up, and that's it. That's the world. Ubisoft did fuck all to improve on the worlds of Far Cry 3 and 4 and just forced you to play side content. Why they thought that was a good idea is beyond me. Hunting is pointless because you can't craft anything. You can sell the skins, but it's just no fun. Animals, there's nowhere near as much variety in this game compared to Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4 in the open world. That's it, in general, that's all I need to say. I know some people might disagree with me on that, so leave your comments down below on whether you agree or disagree with me, and just let everybody know. Have a good conversation down below. Now, for my final section, it's a rarity for me. I'd like to talk about the soundtrack. Don't worry, I'm going to spend about 20 seconds on this. The soundtrack for Far Cry 5 is just incredible. It's not super creative, but it's one of the main reasons I found Joseph's character so believable. The music just sells it. Something about gospel-like music just hits different for me, especially when it's a parody of some of these, let's just say, crazy cults. I just had to mention it. I'm writing the script to When the World Falls on YouTube. It's mad. I really like the soundtrack. Go check it out even if you're not going to play the game. The soundtrack is great. Okay, overall, should you buy Far Cry 5 or is it even worth your time? Well, let me put it this way. If you're still on the fence at the end of this video, then you probably shouldn't. If the world doesn't sound like your kind of thing, then definitely don't buy it. But if you like character-focused stories with some pretty great gunplay, then yeah, I do think you should give it a shot. I don't usually do scores, but for me this is a solid 7 in Ubisoft terms, which means it's more like a 5. It's okay, but it could have been a lot better. Check out other reviews other than mine to make your decision. Stick around by subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and smash that like button. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you for watching.